Hey, welcome everyone to the latest episode of Wizards on the Couch. Thanks for being here on Monday night. Joining me, Danny Grimes, and three other veteran GMs, Matt, Casey Rift, Brian Berg, and Jimmy Duffy. I guess just at the very outset, I should remind everyone who hasn't seen it before, it's an adult show. We enjoy an adult beverage as we are having our discussions tonight. There's a little profanity. We try not to let it get out of hand. So pour yourself a beverage, sit back, and enjoy this evening's episode of Wizards of the Couch. Just quick introductions around the horn. I'll do these real quick, and then we'll move on to our guest this evening. I am Danny Grimes. I'm a professional GM. I'm a graphic designer, a terrain maker, and a cartographer. I'm one of the four wizards here. Matt owns and runs Kobold Con and the Blackwood Society and a Kickstarter as of today and a game company. So he's got his hands full. We're going to talk about the Kickstarter later, Matt. Brian, I see that guy at every convention. Berg. He is a well-known on the convention circuit, author, game designer in the independent games area, and he's the owner and operator of Total Party Kill Games. And then there's Jimmy Duffy, the chief reject over at Praetor's Reject. His Twitch channel runs games all week long. Some of them here, some over there, I think. And he's running stuff several times a week. He's running Lost Minds of Fandelver. Is that right, Jimmy?
That's correct. Friday nights,
Lost Minds of Fandelver. He's got a great group, including a couple of other game designers. So it's kind of cool to watch them all play this game together. And when he is not doing that, he keeps this stream up and running and manages all the tech for us and just generally keeps things going. He also loves Fantasy Grounds. You won't know it by the end of the show. He probably will only mention it like 8 or 9 times.
The Kool-Aid.
So that's all of us. I encourage everybody to get yourself a beverage and sit back and enjoy tonight.
Well, don't mind if I do.
Yeah. Does anybody else have anything before we start?
I say, what are we drinking tonight? I brought Freya's Pale from Exertion. Freya Pale from Exertion. Another Mad Swede brew locally here from Boise. Pale ale.
A little bit of a Nordic theme there, maybe to tie into Midgard.
Yeah, might be apropos.
Midgard,
might have gone into my selection process.
I'm drinking water. I'm still on Whole 30. No booze for Danny Boy.
Proud of you, man. It's amazing.
Thanks.
What are you drinking, Brian?
Terrible. I'm going through sugar withdrawal.
Tonight I am finishing my Millstream Schildbräu Amber, which is a delightful Iowa-based beer, and then I will quickly transition to my Rogue Dead Guy Ale.
That's cool. It was 110 degrees here, so I'm drinking iced tea, folks. I'm hotter than hell, so just deal with it.
Right on. So there's everybody's drink menu. It's a flight of drinks for the Wizards, and we're gonna roll right into tonight's interview. I am really thrilled to be welcoming our esteemed guest tonight, Wolfgang Baur. He is the publisher at Kobold Press. And those of you in the 5e world are going to know many things, I'm sure. I'm not as voluminously knowledgeable about everything as all the folks out there are. But you're going to know him from Home of Beasts, The Hero's Handbook. There's just books of layers and just some of the most innovative stuff that's out there for 5th edition. And he's been a game designer for a long time. His history goes all the way back to TSR, all through Wizards, and then finally to Kobold Press, which he kind of owns and operates. And on top of all that, he's won a ton of awards for a lot of stuff as well. So
he's famous.
Wolfgang would be the first one to say, though, that he doesn't have a big head about it, but I mean, he does write a lot of stuff, and I'm just absolutely thrilled that we have him here tonight to talk about world building. So let's bring Wolfgang on.
He's on.
He's on. Okay,
I snuck in.
Okay,
when nobody was looking. I snuck in.
All right. Well, great. So
Kobolds are crafty.
Everybody, welcome Wolfgang.
Hey, thank you.
Welcome to the show.
the way we usually get this rolling is we just ask some really general questions, and we all just kind of riff in on these for a few minutes. So I guess we're all, nerds have a passion for origin stories. So when did that moment happen for you when you either realized what these games were or why they were important to you?
Oh, that one's easy. I was a junior high school kid, and there was this thing called the Dungeon board game, which was about killing monsters and taking their treasure.
Oh,
and that was the first vaguely RPG-ish thing I played, and I glommed onto the core dynamic immediately. Kill stuff, take stuff, triumph in murder hobo land, right? That was it. But the second moment of the light going on was when somebody said, you could make your own world with this box called D&D, and you don't have to play in the dungeon board game all the time. And that was exactly it. Oh my God, I can make my own dungeons. And I've never recovered.
Yeah. And I love those passages in those early books by Gygax and Arneson where they're just at the end of a sentence where they describe everything they've just done. They say, or you as the GM should feel free to create worlds of your own. and I always loved those sentences. I was just like, wow, this guy's just totally giving me permission to ignore everything he said and do what I want.
I totally took that permission and ran with it. I think that's still sort of an early level up for us, right? Maybe we've been around a long time and kind of vaguely remember it, but every new player at my table is like, can I do this? Can I do that? Do I have permission? Yeah. And just saying yes, you can see the lights go on, right? I can do that.
Well, it happens every day. I mean, you just peruse around the internets for a little bit and watch people ask questions, just like you said. I mean, every day you see those light bulbs pop on, oh, I have creative license to do what I want in my game. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well,
yeah. It's
what's interesting too?
You were saying
is that in real life, how many times a day do you get told no? Isn't it great to have a game where you're being told yes and that you can do all the cool, amazing things that you want?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And with board games, too, often when you're arguing about whether a rule should work a certain way, you're arguing against a rule. Whereas when you're playing and you say, well, can I try this? It's a discussion between you and the GM and maybe even the other players who are all nodding. Or they're like, no way, man.
No, it's a horrible idea. Please, you're going to get us all killed.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I know the answer to this that would be obvious, but I'll ask it anyway. The favorite kind of component of gaming for you, if you looked around all the things you do, all the things you have done in designing, what's the one thing that you kind of are always anxious to get to, or when you're working? Playing.
It's a struggle to stop making monsters, but my monsterholic tendencies continue. But the one thing that lets me put down the monster manuals is picking up the world building tools, right? I'm sort of obsessing on a thing called the Scarlet Citadel right now, where I'm trying to take a whole bunch of notes and whip them into something that could maybe be published someday. And trying to figure out all the connections, and does this passage really need to be there? And, are these monsters too tough? Yeah, that world building part is, how does it all connect? Who are the interesting people? What are the fulcrums? How do I explain it to the players without reading from a giant menu 12 feet long? That part gets me excited. So I guess it's adventure design and world building for me every time.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I think that's what it is at some level for every GM. Whether they're building the world through their words by describing what they're reading, or coming up with their own stuff on the fly. Either end of that spectrum, I think it all comes down to a love of creating an imagination space.
Yes,
that's shareable.
By the way, for anybody out there, I've been looking for that dungeon game for ages. So if you have any runs on, if you see any eBay links.
You did a reprint. Wizards of the Coast reprinted with a brand new set of art.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe
I've got the new one.
Yeah. You don't have the original,
the newish one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be at least 5 years
What we
old.
need to do is break into Alex Kammer's bar. And,
Yeah. I hear you.
and we'll get you 6 of them in shrink. So then kind of the third piece of those questions is like, what is the proudest moment of your involvement in gaming? It can be anything. It can be from professional life or personal life, running, playing, whatever.
Man.
Ooh.
Or maybe your
That's
best
a
interaction
Small,
with
we like the small questions here. I don't know if you've
Yeah,
noticed.
wow. Honestly, it's a moment that's happened multiple times over my career. It's the moment where I find somebody else. I mean, I would have said 20 years ago, it was the moment I first got published, right? Like TSR wrote me a check and I paid rent, right? It was like someone paid me for my work.
my made up stuff.
Feels pretty good.
Yeah.
Yep.
But in the last 10 years, it's way more about, hey, I found this guy and I published this thing in Kobold Press, and it's that thing everybody talks about, right? It's the indomitable fortress of Dib with the overturned wagon, and everyone goes, oh yeah, that one. I'm like, yeah, I found that guy and I published that guy's stuff and he's gone on to do other things, right? So at some point, I'm not sure when, I turned from being the new kid who was just proud to be in it to being the old hand who's like, I'm really proud to be helping other people get that first rung on the ladder. And, they'll be around when I'm gone. They'll still be doing great stuff. And maybe they'll remember me as the guy who said, hey, you.
Yeah, who broke him? Who gave him that first break? Yeah.
Yeah, you did a good thing. You really got it.
I think the inevitable thing I see in a lot of GMs is that ability to go from having the light shined on them to shining lights on other people.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
At your table, right? Everybody wants to be the storyteller in the center of attention first, and they think, I'm a game master, everybody pay attention to me. And then at some point, the really great ones all turn around and say, yeah, let me point that spotlight at you.
Yeah.
You're right.
Well, that is, we've talked, when we go through these questions, it often comes up to like our various styles of play are very different styles of running and playing, I suppose, but that there's so much commonality that is shared in this hobby. Friendly people, number one. In case you can't tell, Wolfgang seems like a perfectly lovely guy, and then on top of it, just that willingness to share with each other and laugh and talk about experiences, I think is something that really runs through the whole industry as far as I see. So, Wolfgang, let's talk. Let's take this from a very, very general point of view to start with, because I think a lot of our audience are more experienced, but some may not be. And I think it's always good to start at the basics and understand kind of the fundamentals. So can you give us some basic advice for any of the viewers who are creating their own personal world? Like, what are the basic building blocks of the beginning of your process when you start your world building?
Well, sure. Everyone's got a different process, and every time you go about it, you probably do it differently. For me, these days, the main things I'm doing is I'm looking to create a publishable world, right? Or I'm looking to do one for a particular group, and I'm looking to run a one-shot or a short arc campaign. And they're totally different animals, right? One needs to be documented. It needs to have an outline. It needs to have a goal, a budget. Who's the audience? What's the scope? How many pages have I got? That's one kind of world building. I think it's just important to realize if you're homebrewing, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff, right? You just need to know, who are the players at my table? What do they care about? And how am I going to entertain them and myself? So I think that scope and audience question is kind of step one. Who are you building for? And then lately I've started thinking that because the game master is always the bottleneck for world building, I really want to keep my work. I want to keep my work shallow. I want to be as superficial as possible.
Yes.
Which is so counterintuitive to us as nerds, right? We all want encyclopedias full of worldwide information 20 generations deep. But I fight that instinct, and what I try to do with world building now is I try to bring it to the village, the town, the particular player characters that we did in session 0, like what happened in character generation, what are their goals, instead of like my world plan for a 20 level arc. Because the 20 level arc never works. What does work is being super shallow, like, okay, this is the inn, this is the town, and this is the ruined gatehouse with the moat just outside, right? Like, if I can bring it down to 3 elements that I want people to see of the world in an early session, that's enough. I can save myself a ton of time, and it can be a sense of adventure for me, too, if I pare it way back.
Yes.
Right? And I won't be disappointed if they don't go to the Dragon Empire in, part 75, because I'm not planning that far ahead. Right? I used to be super obsessive about, here's the arc, and I'm going to make the players follow these rails. It's a dumb idea almost all the time. So anyway, the shallow approach weighed into sort of a very simple setting would be where I'd say start your world building. Don't go back to the genealogies. Like, pick 3 buildings and 3 NPCs and 3 different plot hooks, and see what your players bite at, and let them guide that first wave of world building. Then you can get obsessive later.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yep.
Yeah. What does everybody else think about that? I mean, I know how I feel about it, but what do you guys think?
I was just saying he's talking your language is what I was thinking there, Danny.
Oh, for sure. He and I are having like a psychic level of connection right here. He's not even aware of it.
Isn't it moment? Yeah. And I've talked about this before, but I'm absolutely guilty of trying to flesh out everything. That's why I turn a 20 or 30 page adventure project into a now 70 page module that I'm trying to finish for another project that I'm committed to. So I'm certainly guilty of that and should heed those words of wisdom.
Oh, I'm not saying I've followed my own advice. I'm saying
He heard his wisdom.
I used to do notebooks and binders, but at some point I stopped. Yeah.
But Matt, you're also angling to publish these works, right? So you're doing the work of a publisher. You're documenting.
Right. That's true. I mean, there's certainly some merit or the need to make sure that everybody who's reading your work understands where you're coming from. But I could probably be less deep in some instances.
It's fun to do.
Oh yeah, it's certainly fun.
But do you need to do it? Right. That's how deep you want to go.
One of the projects that we worked on, I worked on with Brian, Wardens of the Wild, which was published by Total Party Code Games. I wrote, I don't know how much it's a source book in and of itself about elves, and I think I submitted to him. It was a group project, and I think I submitted like 30 pages, and 20 of it was lore. And he's like, "Hey, how about we just save some of this for later?" I ended up getting a couple pages in there, but the 30 pages of lore that I had included in background and everything was a little too much for the already big book. Yeah.
I think that tension that's between published and personal has a history, though, in this hobby, because back in the litigious days of TSR, there were people who were afraid to use the word orc or use the word, you know what I mean, because they sensed that this was owned by someone and, you couldn't just like pull from it. And then when the OGL came out, suddenly like everybody who'd had a fantasy about, I'm going to tell my story about Drow, they had a license to go nuts. And so that line between personal and professional was kind of blurred there as a lot of amateurs rushed into the game, literally and figuratively into that game. And then, so that's probably the last big influx into this hobby before this latest 5e influx.
Well, and I think the 5e influx has changed it, right? We've seen a lot of people pushing more narrative and player-centric directions as opposed to the old, I've got my story and you're all gonna listen to me approach, which I'm as guilty of as anyone, but which I think can be only massively successful when that one story I gotta tell is really compelling for the people at your table, right?
Right.
If you've missed the boat on what they're after, if they're all looking to, I don't know, tell a particular kind of stealth story and you're all about rampaging barbarian werebeasts, they're two different tales.
Right.
So
Go ahead.
Wolfgang was he touched on a really great thing that I wanted to talk about for just a quick second. You mentioned like how deep do you delve into all of this, right? And if you were average Joe game master running a game for your friends, the moment it begins to feel like work, you've probably delved too deep. If you're wondering about what kind of insects dire frogs eat and you feel the need to create a list of, that sort of thing, you've probably gone too far.
A table.
And I'm only lightly joking, because like you said, there's an amount of things that your players need to know, and then there's an amount of things that they're never going to care about, even if you did flesh it out.
Right. But I think it's important to recognize that if you're that DM and you're having a good time with the table of insects, that's bringing joy to you, right? And your players won't care. They'll just say, oh man, another ankheg, another giant spider, right? This campaign sure has a lot of bugs in it. But
he's not talking about your game, Jimmy.
That's a new hashtag for us. Hashtag table of insects. Okay.
Table of insects.
There we go.
Insect swarm, giant insects.
Love it.
Sticks to stick insects. I mean, I don't want to talk people out of having fun going deep, right? If you want to fill binders and notebooks with stuff for your own benefit, go for it. Just don't expect a publisher to do anything other than say, yeah, this lore, we're going to get to that later. Or, I asked you for 5,000 words, not 25. And as long as you're having fun and you're not boring your players, you're doing it right.
Right.
Yeah.
Matt was sending me secret messages. He was wondering no hashtag there, Brian. I'm like, I'm taking it easy on Wolfgang right now. We'll let it happen later.
The Sharpie's gone to Brian's head. He's slowed down a little bit.
So, Wolfgang, we talked to Anna Meyer about a month or so ago, and she filled us in on the maps that she's been working on with you and with the Midgard setting. So let's chat a little bit about that. And one of the things that I was curious about is you mentioned it being myths and folklore of Eastern and Central Europe. So can you can you tell us how that's all
I don't think that's
together in your
right. Those things are important to Midgard, although I wouldn't say they're the most important special sauce. Like, I think there are certain touchstones in any campaign that everybody's like, yeah, that's the thing that world is about. And there's a lot of myths and folklore rolled into Midgard, right? It's the Norse tales, it's the Eastern Europeans, it's the Germans and the Italians and all those legends. Yeah, Freya's in there. And, and there's a goddess of beer in Midgard who's based on a Sumerian goddess. Yeah, there's a brewery called Ninkasi. That's her.
Nice.
Yeah, so, I mean, pulling all those things in is a blast. But it's mostly because I enjoy them tremendously, and I have so much fun working on pantheons as a core element of world building. There are other people who are like, whatever, we're going to try and simplify the pantheon, or we're just going to use the Norse or the Greek or whatever, the Forgotten Realms gods. But the part that Anna aces, of course, is maps, and the Midgard map is a wildly blenderized European map with Cthulhuid creatures and ley lines everywhere and things that have sunken off the coast. And, there's something that's sort of like a River Nile if the River Nile were pure mana. And the Egyptian gods each had a city of their own that they ruled as ultimate kings, right? Or queens. So it's kind of Europe turned up to 11 and put through a Frazetta filter. Is more the way I put at it these days.
That's why you're the writer, man. That was a killer line.
I'm still working on the
I'm going to
kill line.
download that for my phone.
That's a hashtag.
All right.
It's too long. It's too long to be a hashtag.
Darn it. I'm going to have to get pithier to hit enough of Brian's hashtags here. But the map is part of the fun, right? The online map for Midgard is the map that Anna Meyer drew in as much detail as her Greyhawk map. And it's stunningly beautiful, right? It's the part of world building that I'm really not good at is the drawing maps part. But she's a genius at it. And so when I said, here's what we need, and we need these kind of textures, and oh, by the way, can you make it all searchable and filterable, and can we take out the roads, and can we do distance mapping from point to point? No problem. Do overlays. It's a searchable online map. It's like the dream of I can find everything on this map without trying very hard. And that's all her work. The map I had for Midgard at the start was here's the river, here's the city, here's some mountains, here's a forest.
Yeah.
It was like literally 4 elements, right? Like that's the birth of Midgard right there. There's a town, a river, a forest, and some mountains. And then it was, well, where do you guys want to go? Well, we want to hang out in town. Okay, great. There's stuff underneath, and I let players kind of guide the first campaign. But it quickly turned into something bigger. And at that point I said, well, my stick figure maps ain't cutting it. Let's get Anna on it.
Get a pro in here.
Yeah.
So you talk about the Genesis. How long has this been gestating?
So this really depends. There are parts of the setting that go back to my junior high school days. I have
Awesome.
Yeah, the Magocracies are probably the oldest part, and some of the stuff about the Elf Kingdoms is super old. But I used to have a DM NPC who was the Archmage and was giving missions to characters from from when I was 14 to 17 or so.
Oh wow.
It's so great to hear this behind the scenes stuff. People are going to love that.
Well, I mean, there's stuff that you like that you've done previously. It's like the world map isn't the same, but I still like these characters, right? So I'm bringing the characters over, or the evil gnomes thing. But other parts are brand new. Like I didn't really touch Baba Yaga as part of Midgard until 2012. So all the Russian influence stuff came much later. And okay, most of the Southlands and the Arabian section is lightly disguised Al-Qadimish 1001 Nights, right? It's like, no, we know where it's from. We know the themes. How am I going to do it this time? Well, I'm changing a few things. But yeah, the oldest parts of it are literally 30 years old or more. And the newest parts and the hardcover book is 5 or 6 years old.
All right, Wolfgang, I'm going to pause you for just a moment. You mentioned Al-Qadim. So
Yes.
I was waiting for the right opportunity to show this. Not everyone may know.
Oh, yes.
Right? I don't know how well you
And
folks
alone.
know that.
You
There you go.
got
That's good.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the first thing I saw your name on.
Yeah.
That was one of my favorite books. Yeah, the background on the hashish and all that stuff. That was a great.
I love doing the assassins. It still cracks me up that she's wearing high heels on the cover. That is so early 90s.
Yeah.
They had the same problem in the Jurassic Park movie. Nobody's learned a lesson.
No, really. Like, if you're an assassin in difficult footwear, your life is harder, right? Why make it tough on yourself?
She's just that skilled.
She is.
Mhm.
Look at her.
That's her way of throwing everyone off. No one would be an assassin in high heels.
Mhm.
Ludicrous. That would never happen.
Right.
Yeah, well, thank you for that blast from the past. That was a great project to work on.
I bet.
That project was, again, one of those where when I brought that box, nobody knew what to expect from it. It was like, it was so literally foreign, but literal, just out of the box, So same deal with Tome of Beasts. Suddenly I had this resource where like nobody had any clue what any of these things were. And they're like, what's happening now? Like, you're all going to die is what's happening.
I swear you, the best part of adventures and world building is the value of surprise. And I blame my days working on magazines for this, right? Because Dragon Magazine every 30 days was supposed to inspire you and amaze you and convince you to run D&D that month. And I think I absorbed that in the water at the TSR water coolers. Like, give people something they haven't seen. Even if it's old material, give it to them in a new way.
So let me ask you then, Wolfgang, if you wanted to give really practical advice, like things people out there on the internet can actually use, places they can go find tools for, what are your hacks to world building?
All right. I have a few. I don't know if they work for other people, but what the heck? Hey, let's see. I think one of my hacks for world building is figuring out what your special sauce is for this particular campaign or setting, right? Like, what is the magic thing that you have and nobody else does? Like, Dark Sun says you get no metal, you get no water, you have no hope, life is bleak, right? It's like, okay, I know what that is. If it's Ravenloft, there's going to be vampires and mist. I get
Ravenloft.
Yes, so good, right? Despair now, you have entered the mists. Which brings joy to every DM's heart, right? Like,
they do to my players.
But like, figuring out what that is, and it's not always obvious. You may think, well, it's a dragon and lances, right? It's like, but is that really the thing? Maybe. Maybe there are draconians. Maybe there are moon-based magics. I mean, there's a number of things that you may decide later are what your setting is all about. But the sooner you figure out what your unique element is, like, hey, this is all set in Atlantis, the easier it is to play it up, right? That's the thing, people. That's what this is about. In Call of Cthulhu, it's you're all going insane, fast or slow. It's going to happen.
Just roll your character right to the grave because...
Right. Don't get too attached. Bring plenty of kerosene.
Put wheels on those characters. They're going to go downhill fast.
Yes. One of my other favorite hacks is all of the automatic map building tools now. There was one called World Spinner for a while. It's like, I don't want to draw a world map. I'm going to use World Spinner. Actually, that's not true. I want to draw a world map, and I want to spend about 6 months doing it. And the sad truth is I don't actually have 6 months to draw a world map anymore. So I'd spin it up very quickly. There's also a procedurally generated one. Shoot, you have to put it in the show notes or someone's going to have to remind me. Like Fantasy Town Generator or Medieval Town Generator?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
You know the one.
Oh, yes.
If you've seen it, you're like, oh my goodness, you've just saved me no end of time. Right. And if you've never seen it, go dig it up because it's just genius. It's like, oh, look, a town. And then
whoever created that website, hit me up at a convention. I will buy you a beer. And I now know I'm going to get like 75 people who claim that they invented it.
Everyone's going to say it. But I mean, it's a very, very simple way to save yourself some time. And the other sort of big time saver for me is figuring out early which NPCs I'm going to care about and which I'm going to annoy my players with early. For Zobek, it turned out to be one of the priests, one of the Shadow Fae ambassadors, and the Kobold King, who was pretty much a guest star with different name every week because Kobold Kings don't last that long. Nice. But they were the power players in town, and they kept saying, you're adventurers, and I need you to do X for me, or it's going to go badly for you, or I need you to do X for me, and I will make you rich. And so knowing who those recurring characters are, I don't know. I mean, when we say world building, people think maps, towns, nations, society, culture. But learning that, like, your 10 best NPCs are crucial to your world building was kind of a light bulb moment for me some time ago. You could probably do world building just with lists of characters if you wanted.
Yes.
That's some insight.
Yes, you definitely can.
You've done it. I take it.
If you ever played Legends of the Five Rings, that's pretty much all L5R is. It's an impenetrable network of influence.
Yes. Vampire works the same way. There's any number of games that do this. And I think D&D can do it, right? Like the paladin has a mentor or the monk has his sensei. And if you know who everybody's mentor is and who everybody's nemesis is, you've got a campaign.
Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, pretend it's D&D.
Don't have to pretend. I think there was a dragon article. We had to figure out class and level for everybody.
Nice.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I don't know that it held up. I think that was after like book 2. It's been some time.
Yeah.
I remember the very early days of Dragon, somebody did an article where they listed out all the Lord of the Rings characters.
Oh, yeah, and got sued.
It got sued, and then they had to retract. I mean, it's crazy, but I was like, wow, Aragorn's only like 7th level? That seems really low.
That's amazing.
Dude, like the King of Men. What's the deal?
And he's a ranger and doesn't fight with scimitars? What?
Yeah.
What's going on there?
But I think that was before any of that. That was before that trope of scimitars or any of that stuff. Anyway, that's an aside. Just
How should Rangers be played? We could rat hole on Rangers here for an hour if we felt.
Yeah, that'd be
another show.
That's
rat holing on Rangers.
Oh, jeez.
Again, phrasing. I think we're gonna have to pull that out now. That's fine.
Thank you, Brian.
Moving on. Next topic.
Well, that would roll to me then, and talking about. I'm just going to take it right there. When we chatted about it briefly off camera, but the question was how Cold Press and yourself. We were talking about the print media and the PDF, the technical side, and moving to the digital. But now we're getting into the VTT realm because that's where I play a lot, and wanted to know how you have, what you have seen and how you're adapting your product line and your presentation to incorporate that platform for us who like that ability.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, it's a wonderful platform. Fantasy Grounds, Roll20. There's any number of ways to do this. I think there's a new one from Drive-Thru called Astral or something. I haven't.
Astral Tabletop, Yep.
Yeah, I haven't looked at that one yet. But there's a number of them. And Fantasy Grounds is certainly a great one. Kobold Press has said at this point, we're in on VTTs, right? Like, we're going to try to make sure that everything we do is available there for people who prefer that play environment. It's a bunch of extra work, and we do think about design a little differently. Our adventures now, like we recently went back and changed up Courts of the Shadowfey, which is something we published for 4th edition and for Pathfinder, and then we brought it to 5th edition recently. It's this great big shadow planar set of elves and their intrigues, and it's full of dueling and deception, and roach demons. So
that is unique, by the way.
Yeah, no one else went with the roach demons. We thought we were blazing a trail and others would follow, and in fact, yeah. Anyway, massive spoiler for Court of the Shadowfey. There is a roach demon. Look out.
Hashtag roach demon love.
Yes.
Okay, I'll work on that.
Moving on from that one. But the point of VTTs there is we went back and we said, we've got this giant poster map and it's not really crisp enough for VTT play, right? People want to zoom in and see all the details of the room. So part of bringing it into 5th edition was we went back to the cartographer. We said, okay, we want the same map you gave us before, only at like 4 times the resolution with a whole bunch of extra stuff added in. And he was like, but I already gave you that map, right? And we're like, yeah, and we're willing to pay for it again. And he's like, okay, well, at least I'm going to get a really good turnover, right? Like he's going to use his first map as the sketch for the new one. And then we realized we needed to create visual assets for like literally all 150 NPCs and monster, everything else, like a huge number. of visual assets for Courts of the Shadow Fae, because it's so character driven. There's goblins and Shadow Fae and troll and trollkin, and it just goes on. Well, in the print version of that, we show you like 25 or 40 maybe illustrations of particular people, and they're the highlights and the major NPCs and everything. But there's a banquet scene in this thing. And if I had remembered the banquet scene before we committed to making tokens for everything, we might have said, can we just make some blue and yellow and red ones for some of the lesser characters? But yeah, we went all out. So we had to find artists who could do a nice job with those tokens. We had to sort of plan out the budget to include that additional level of art for VTTs. And then the other thing we do now that we didn't do as much before is sort of layered things, right? It's the Shadow Realm. There's a whole lot of light and darkness, things that are hidden. There are illusions. All of that affects the map and affects gameplay, and we wanted at least some of it to be reflected in the Fantasy Grounds environment. Right. So really, I guess what I'm saying here is it's a shift to visual play and visual assets, right? It's the opposite of theater of the mind. It's where are you? What does it look like? Here's my character. The other sort of hard lesson we learned from some people was there's a part of the VTT audience that likes the tokens that show faces or whatever, but there's also people who are like, no, if it's not a top-down token, it stinks.
That's right. Yep.
I'm like, well, but we commissioned all this beautiful art of faces and busts, and the top-down people were like, we are so disappointed in you.
That's so funny. Yeah.
Hashtag the top-down people.
It's another.
It turned out but Devin Knight did a whole. He has done all those tokens in the meantime, but you got to buy them separately because we ran out of money. We weren't doing 2 complete sets of tokens.
Oh my gosh.
I'm going to have to talk to Doug Davison from Fantasy Grounds and just start charging him, like $5 every time we mention Fantasy Grounds in our episodes.
I was expecting
at this point, it's just so much free advertising for him.
Yeah.
He's about to get a bunch more later here in the show. So
It's a good product. I mean, Roll20 does a good job too, and Astral, whatever it is, it's coming from Drive-Thru. It's got to be good. They've got 1 million artists on that site. It seems like the assets would be there.
Astral Roach Demons.
Yes. That's coming in
Share the love.
Piece too.
Share the love. Share the love. I had a quick follow-up to something you said just a minute ago about how the VTT aspect has changed the way you produce the game. But has it changed anything about the way you write the content and create the content?
Yeah.
Or is it just the same thing?
No. This happened to us in Prepared 2, which is those one-shots that we've done. We've done 2 collections of them. They're easy, play them in a night kind of things. And they're wonderful, but they each have a single map. And occasionally we thought about, we should have a big fancy map, or we should have a map where the scale is like 1 square equals 10 yards.
Top down.
Or
Yep.
10.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And all of a sudden it's like, well, how's that going to look on the VTT? Right? So we've tailored some of our adventures to fit in the space or to require a map that we might not have commissioned otherwise, right? With Courts of the Shadow Fae, there was an encounter on the Shadow Road that we literally didn't give you a map for, right? It's like they come out of the trees, you're on the road, it's a fight. You're the dungeon master, you can handle it, right? You don't need us to handhold you.
Some minis on the table. Yeah.
Right, come on, it's a road encounter.
I want a map.
Exactly. And so for the 5th edition, we generated a map in the Shadow Realm, so it looks kind of cool with all these blues and purples and crazy shadows, but it's still just a road map, right? Part of me is like, should we have killed that encounter instead of paying for that map? But
You know what? It's okay, and I'll be the bad guy here. Okay, it's a game about imagination. If you're the game master, you should be able to handle it. It's okay.
Right.
So I have one of the encounters in the first episode of this adventure series that we're got on Kickstarter right now. Same or very similar scenario to what you're describing. It's an encounter on the road. It just happens. I mean, just run through it. And Jimmy's like, "Hey, we need a map for that." I was like, "No, we don't need a map for that." We went back and forth, and then unbeknownst to me, he just goes and makes his own map for it and somehow gets it for the adventure.
Which is fine. I mean, you got to be adaptable. I have no problem with that. Yeah.
I think it's hard too for some of us who
the opposite of adaptable. That's
play a home game, but they're
flexible. It's fine.
Like Jimmy, whose primary game is VTT, so it's no joke. It's like he does need those maps, because he's got remote players. It's harder to generate that experience without them. So,
right.
Most of the time.
Well, hey, I think we're going to wrap this little part up right here. We're going to get into our next topical segment here in just a couple of minutes. Wolfgang, can you stick around?
I can stick around.
Killer.
For a bit.
Okay.
About 10 minutes.
Stick around.
Yeah, stick around, and when you're ready to leave, just get up in a huff and flip your keyboard.
Can't believe you people.
Yeah, just stalk out of the room. That's the best way to leave. So
Make sure
just
you
a quick
your video because that makes Jimmy really happy. Just flip your video.
close your video and then decide you want to come back.
All right, Jimmy, I'm taking that advice.
So anyway, we are Wizards of the Couch. We're here tonight with Wolfgang Baur, designer, world builder of things all the way from El Qadim to Midgard for a lot of different publishers. But we are Wizards of the Couch. We're here that's the first time I've slipped on that.
We are trained professionals.
We are trained professionals. We're on every other Monday in general, 9 p.m. Central Standard Time on Twitch at twitch.tv/Wizards of the Couch. You can also find us all over social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whole bunch of places. And I do want to just touch quickly, aside from all that, on a Kickstarter, which launched today. I'm looking at you, Matt, because you launched this for your world, your setting of Irrefear. And I'd like you to talk just a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah. 30-second elevator speech. We launched today for a 4-part adventure series, which is episodic. So each individual session is intended to be played in one convention block. So typically a 4-hour block, which means 12 hours of content. There's some new classes included in it, a ton of new monsters, which I know will make Wolfgang very happy. Ton of new creatures. The setting itself, we're calling Irrefear, but it is essentially Industrial Revolution 1920s that was shaped by magic. That's kind of the I guess tagline that are trying to attach to it. If you'd like to go out to it, we can put the link in the doodly-doos there. Doodly-doos or doodly?
Doodly-doo. Yeah, doodly-doo.
Right, so that's, but it is kickstarter.wizcogames.net.
Yeah, so everybody go check it out. We just started funding today, and we're making our way along, but we'd really like to close this thing out as a winner. There's some cool stretch goals too, so you should scroll on down and read all about it. And we'd love to have everyone's support so we can get this off the ground. It's independent publishing, man. That's what people want. They want cool stuff from smaller presses where people are a little more free to do what they think is cool. So, okay, so we're moving into this next topic, but I think we're already on it. I think we just continue the conversation at this point. If I get the opportunity to talk to a world builder, that's like that's a title now. Wolfgang, you are Wolfgang the World Builder.
Does it come with a raise? All right.
Yeah. Now there's a man who has his priorities straight.
We were corrected.
Yeah.
We were corrected in chat earlier, by the way. It is the Wolfgang. We've been saying it wrong this whole time. It's the Wolfgang.
The Wolfgang. Got it.
Me.
The Wolfgang.
The World Builder.
So when we already talked a little bit about the base theory of world building, like how do you start and so forth.
Sure.
But whether it's I think the difference between a publisher and a personal world is not as different as we may have made it sound early on, because I think, like you said, for a lot of people, whether they're really going to publish it, that dream of expressing their world in its full glory is there. So even if it's not going to be published, they want it to take on all the aspects of a published work. They're going to have maps, they're going to do drawings, they're going to do all that kind of stuff. So we get into the decision-making process of world building. Like, how do you make decisions as you go forward about where to put more depth, where to back off, where to lean on tropes, maybe, or lean on ideas, or create your own? And then how do you edit yourself back? Like I always run forward and then I trim, and then I run forward and I eliminate. How does it work for everybody else? We'll start with you, Wolfgang.
Oh, fair. Well, I would tell everybody to read the Kobold Guide to World Building for the long version of this answer.
Yes, you would, the Wolfgang.
Well, I mean, there's some stuff in there, like Jonathan Roberts talks about the basics of cartography and how to do a good map, right? How to do a river system, how to do mountains, all of that sort of thing. If you're like me, not very good with sketching the map, Jonathan's got some great advice there. There's also sections by Ed Greenwood and me and Monty Cook and a bunch of others about our approaches to world building. But the ruthless editing is definitely, it's the hardest part, right? Like, you put something out there, you do some play tests, or you pass it to an editor, or a friend of yours reads it and they say, well, this part makes no sense. It can be tough, right? Because in your head, you can picture it, but getting it onto paper or getting it across the table to other people is sometimes pretty hard. The more time you've spent DMing, the better you are at expressing yourself verbally. But if you're submitting something to be published, you got to type it out. And that's just a different way of presenting what you've got. You may be great at improv in the moment, but if none of that improv makes it onto the page, it's not publishable. My tip for homebrewers about editing yourself is kind of back to the go shallow thing. Can you keep it to the present tense, right? Is this something characters care about right now? And if you can put yourself in the player's eyes at all and say, what are they going to ask me about? And let's put that down in my index cards. You're way ahead. Now, I don't know about you. I can't predict my players all the time, but I can predict some of it. And I can guide them subtly to want what it is I want them to want. So you're the bottleneck, right? Think about the dialogue that's going to work. Think about the characters that are going to work. Think about what's driving the players. The more immediate you are, the better off you are. So the editing I find myself doing most often on written submissions for publication is taking out backstory, taking out stuff that's out of the scene, taking out stuff that is historic, and focusing on the here and now. That's the editing you need to do. Stop thinking about the past. Keep thinking about, will the players kill it, loot it, or talk to it?
Cut out 30 pages of backstories on elves. Yeah.
So why do we see it so often then? If a good editor removes that, everything, I mean, not everything, I mean, really good stuff, I guess, does follow your paradigm, but like, I see backstory all the time. It's a lot of stuff is super
backstory is awesome, right? Like the Silmarillion is all backstory, right?
My favorite Tolkien book. I gotta be perfectly honest. And he didn't even write.
I mean, right? It's like, well, it's all the work that he had to do to get to Lord of the Rings, right?
Yeah, yeah. His research paper.
Right, and my process is often the same thing. I'll write all the backstory, right? I'll say, well, this is the blood cult, and they are friends with ogres, and they live here, and they dug some caves, and they did this, and the other thing. Like, and then they dug some tombs, and then they all died out, and the tombs were abandoned. I'm like, oh my God, is this ever something the players are going to care about? Well, I care about it. I'm having a good time thinking about the, Crimson Tusk ogres. And the players won't see any of that. What they'll see is, wow, these halls are really weird, and there seem to be a lot of altars with blood channels on them, and no one can read this writing, and they all seem to have gone insane and disappeared. Now they're undead. Well, we care about the undead, right? Like all of that weird backstory that Call of Cthulhu investigators care about, D&D characters don't.
Yeah.
But it's valuable because as a designer, you have to write the Silmarillion, or at least half of it, to get the
Your
Lord of the
brand
Rings.
Bible.
Yeah, it's really, you're writing your setting Bible, you're writing the stuff that's for you. And it's fine to write stuff that's for you as the game master. You don't have to share it with the players. They're just going to not care anyway. So keep it for you.
But you know what?
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead,
Okay.
man. No. All right. So excellent point. And I think talking about the Silmarillion, that's just poignant because there's so many people out here who love Lord of the Rings, right? Love it. And for the most part, the audience that consumes the film isn't going to go out and read the Silmarillion, right? It's for those rabid fans, those people who want to devour every ounce of knowledge. They want to get in the head of the writer. They want to know everything. That's what that sort of thing is for. And it serves a purpose, but maybe not for the general audience.
Right. Like if you're writing a player's handbook, you don't need that stuff. And if you're writing an adventure, you need a little of that stuff. And if you're like writing for the people who eat world books like cupcakes, right? They will love you forever for going super deep. But there's not that many of them.
No.
It's a smaller group.
That's why the print run for Tollus was only like 1,000 books.
Yeah.
Because it's everything. You know,
Yes.
it's everything.
That's
monstrous. Not everybody wants.
Yeah.
Wow,
I do because I love the active world building, but not for anything beyond that. Yeah, that idea of editing ruthlessly. I mean, what about everybody else? When you're putting together your adventures, like how do you know when to rein it in?
I don't, which is my problem.
Didn't you pick up on that earlier?
Hashtag I have a problem.
Right. So yeah, I've got my this is my skull splitter plug there. This is my Bible for Erefir right now, and yeah, I have to have kind of to what Wolfgang was talking about earlier. I have to have some reason for why something is there, and even if in fact, let me back up one step. Somebody told me back when I had a completely different non-gaming business that nobody will love your business as much as you do, and that really got to the core at the time when I was doing that. You know, oh my God, why wouldn't they love this? The same thing is true in gaming. Like, why wouldn't they want to know how this, you know, the blood ogres, why they made this particular cave 1,000 years ago? And so yeah, I have to have a reason behind what I'm creating in the here and now. And yeah, that's absolutely the way I start from the back. Or I'm sorry, I start from this is what I want to do, and then I have to make all those tendrils lead back to why.
Yeah,
which is unfortunate because it takes a lot more time.
But I think what you get out of it is you get plausibility and consistency. It lines up with the rest of your world building.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, it's easy to see world building that in-depth level as like the second two Matrix movies, where they answered all the questions that the first movie asked.
There's gonna be a fourth now.
You know, so like, but not kidding, Wolfgang. When you brought up the point about keeping it shallow, like if all they see is the blood runnels in the stone and the weird altars, you're making them ask questions. They're asking questions about why. If you provide the answers, that interaction is somehow, in a lot of ways, over.
Yeah, I mean, you want to provide some answers, but you never want to hand out the, you know, here's my 32-page setting book. Please read it before character generation.
Right. Which, you know, guilty, but I think I was 15 in my defense. But whatever. Let me tell you about my setting book.
Yeah, exactly. But what you want is you want them to create kick-ass characters and then, have the answers to those mysteries and dole them out slowly.
So I'm gonna riff off that. I don't have a whole lot of time anymore. And so I've taken this opposite approach, which kind of is between both of you guys. I have a ton of ideas, and unfortunately, that means nothing, right? So I like to take bite-sized tidbits that are really, really juicy, that any game master who reads that one little paragraph, little sidebar goes, holy shit, I could do something amazing with that. And now it's their idea, not my idea, right? And they implement something and they do something great with it, and have a great time, and they're invested because it's their story now, right?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. You look at some of the old Gygax modules, and they're like 12 pages long, but they're like loaded with hooks and juicy options. And
yes,
yeah, there's not a lot of word count, but it's like, what's in the giant sack table? Roll D10, and every one of those 10 is like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
What's in the giant sack? This is a kid's show.
All hits, no whammies.
I was told this was an adult program.
Actually, shout out to Beth Damus. This is Acquisitions Intoxicated.
That was a great show.
Join Wednesdays on
That really was. I told her I was going to start bringing that up at least once every episode. So
Fantastic.
So one of the things that I struggle with is being unique versus compelling. I is the way that I've phrased this particular tidbit. And I think my weakness is that I will, as I already mentioned, I'll go to town on the book in the background, but then I get strung up on is it unique? And I guess my question for the group then is how do you balance the two? Like when do you start worrying about whether or not your particular setting or your monster or your encounter, your module, whatever, is unique versus is the story compelling, and are your players going to have fun? So let's just keep the ball rolling with Brian.
Oh, geez. Okay, so I think I touched on that later. I'm going to check my notes here real quick. Well, I don't think that you can be truly unique anymore. And so I think the biggest, most important thing is if you're going to use a trope, own it, twist it, make it your own. And because people understand what tropes are. They react to good tropes, right? We see them over and over and over in movies. We see them in adventures. And it's the good twist on a good trope that the players can identify and they can understand. But then when it's tied in well and done well to your campaign, your setting, you truly own it, that's when it means a lot to them.
Sure.
That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I go for compelling over unique every time. I think that I think it is possible to be unique. I mean, new art will always be created. But to me, it's all about purpose-driven design. Like, what is my, like, for example, I'll just use movies as an example. The Sixth Sense, it needed uniqueness. Mm-hmm. It rotated on an axis of a unique ending. Like there was a surprise. There was something different about that movie than all the other movies. But there's tons of other great movies that don't deal with that at all, and they're still great. So to me, I think I'm constantly watching my players. I'm watching their faces, and when I say it's a special kind of giant that you've never seen before, they're like, okay, but they're still waiting for something. And what they're waiting for is, does the guy throw a boulder at me or offer me a mug of beer? Because that's what they're actually concerned about. And later they'll appreciate that it's a weird variant giant that does, whatever. But for them, it's the juice is what matters, not the rest of it. So.
Sure. And I think at the table, yeah, I 100% agree with what both of you said. I think at the table, it's less of a concern to me than if you're trying to put something in print, I suppose. So, Wolfgang, how do you kind of handle that when you're looking at creating Midgard, for example? How are you balancing? Hey, I want a compelling story versus
right. I basically the lesson I learned in the Planescape days is kind of what Brian said. lean into it, own it, make it your own. Back when we would call it the Planescape twist, right? Hey, there's a bunch of demons. Great. What's interesting about that? They live in a city. Oh, okay. And they're members of organized societies, and twisted.
Yeah.
At that point, though, with Midgard and Aldeem and a lot of these things that rely on tropes from real world myths and legends, yeah, if I'm going to give you Baba Yaga, she's got to be the best Baba Yaga you've ever seen.
Right.
I'm just like committed to, well, everybody says the map looks like Europe. And I'm like, yeah, it does, doesn't it? Looking, right? Like
It worked for Europe.
It worked for Europe. Well, the research library is really easy to gather, and B, the players kind of think they know what's going on, right?
Yes,
Which
exactly.
they do. I don't have to explain to them, hey, they're feuding city-states, haha, like Renaissance Italy. They're like, oh, they're feuding city-states like Renaissance Italy. Yeah, Where's the Pope? Oh, there's no Pope, guys. I got bad news for you. And then I can lay out the twist, which is, the war god is keeping them at war. And by the way, they need somebody to take their pilgrimage into, the neighboring country or whatever it is.
So that's good. So rather than competing with, let's say, trope, rather than competing with states in Italy,
Yep.
use that as the not the backdrop, but use that as the frame of reference to spin.
If you've given them that frame of reference, you save a ton of world building time. It's sort of a mental shortcut for your players, right?
Yes.
They're like, I sort of get what this culture is about. They feel they have a hook into the world. It's not all alien to them. The problem with settings like Spelljammer or Dark Sun isn't that they're, the problem is it's hard to put your brain around what is this culture, right? Like, what is a spacefaring fantasy culture? And the fun of it is exploring it and figuring it out. But the first few sessions of it's D&D in space is like, how does gravity work? Who are the elves in this culture? Why did those gnomes have a steamship? Like, everything's weird and alien and has to be explained at length. Where does oxygen come from? Right? Like, if you have to explain breathing as part of your world building, you're doing more work.
What do you mean oxygen sticks to ships as I fly through space?
Right? I mean, you can explain it. You're just working harder.
Yeah, well, there's more and less challenging fiction out there too. Read Moorcock. It requires a different perceptual framework to fully engulf that. And
That's a good way to put it.
What's that?
That's a nice way to put it.
Yeah, it's also just confusing as hell.
Well, one of the things we were going to do, because I'm going to move over to my segment, because they're just dying to see some Fantasy Ground stuff on the show, because that's what we showcase here is Fantasy Ground. But we decided, don't cut me off. You roll 20.
Never forget, you're in control of the camera.
I just cut him off. That's right. I did.
Suddenly he got muted.
Yeah, I should mute him. But we wanted to show, because we were just chatting about some of because I'm not a world builder like the rest of these guys that you're seeing. And so if you notice, I didn't have an answer there because I'm relying on them to make the uniqueness and the compelling. And some of this compelling stuff that we have listed here, we love from Kobold Press. I just keep plugging away there.
The creature.
And we were chatting about the lovely fortress of the impregnable fortress of Dib. It's Dib, yeah. And who I'm sure everybody, hopefully most people have seen this, but if you haven't, get it. It is one of the staples of those. You call them one shots, basically.
Who's running this show?
Yeah. So, and Wolfgang, you said we were chatting about the VTT, but you mentioned something off camera about that. You've got more in the channel of this.
Oh yeah. No, we've committed to Fantasy Grounds and Roll20 and just VTTs generally. Like, we're not doing our new stuff without support for those platforms anymore. There was a time when we were like, it's a bunch of extra work, it's a bunch of extra art, it's hard to do. We don't know that we understand it that well. Well, we're past that. And like Tales of the Old Margrave, which we just shipped, was right up front, right? Like you could pledge for your favorite VTT and nothing else. If you didn't want print or PDF, we would just get that. So, yeah, I think there's been a big change in the industry where there is, it's not the majority by any stretch, but it's a significant number of people.
Well, I even think we utilize this because, like, I run several of the bigger module, the more expansive type scenarios for our sessions on the channel because I'm trying to keep it's programming. But what we were doing for a while, and I've actually had a couple of viewers come in here, we ran some West Marches campaign for a little bit, and even with those homebrew of taking these products and you twist them just a little bit, make it a little bit, unique to the uniqueness level coming into what you're doing with your world, and you run with it. If you need something real quick, grab one of these products and pull in the encounters. You've got so much built there to use, and it's all you've got to do is drag and drop basically straight into what you're playing, and that's on the not even just the virtual tabletop side, but even on the tabletop. That's right. Yeah, the Portal's Reach was it. Yeah, and we need to go back to it sometime, but I was a little busy. But I have wanted to say that I have thoroughly enjoyed the products there that has come out of Kobold Press, and if I'm showing some of the PDFs here, just some of the artwork and getting that is phenomenal, because that's just that little extra oomph that I need in the show, so that my players are engaged. And the viewers are too. And I know that, yes, there is a money issue there, but taking it from a black and white to a color type deal. But what's a little couple extra dollars to, so most of us will pay that, or we'll do the Kickstarter. Okay.
But see, take note that it's not lost on your viewership, your fans. I mean, the way that we play D&D today is changing. So there's a lot more Jimmies out there.
A lot. And so whatever platform it is. Sorry, Matt, go ahead. Yep.
No, I just said so to speak, or phrasing.
So anyway, I wanted to recommend you. The Tome of Beasts was one of the first ones that got me. And in Fairmount, I'm showing here the Creature Codex and the layers. And then like you were chatting about, we have Prepared and Prepared 2, which they're about 7 or 8 scenarios in each one of those? Or
no, they're about a dozen each.
Okay. All right, I'm looking through it right now. Okay. And they're completely fleshed out at different levels to take in, just pop right on in there. And it's honestly, for those who we need something just to want a little change of pace, or my storyline has taken a dive somewhere, or I need that extra hop to get to that next part of the storyline, instead of just throwing some, I need to figure it out real quick. Well, here it is. Let me just run this right on in there, and they won't know the difference.
Usually, it's usually the taking a dive part, right? Usually, isn't that normally where?
But that's so. Any other?
We're a well-oiled machine, Wolfgang. A well-oiled machine.
Shots
vicious
fired.
Mockery.
A lot. There's a lot.
I will say that. I mean, if you look at it from a straight development standpoint, I mean, it is, somebody has to do that work that Jimmy just described, and if being able to include that into Fantasy Grounds and Roll20, and as a game master who has limited amount of time, if they can just drag and drop that stuff into their game, and that is huge. It's life altering almost for somebody who's trying to keep their campaign stitched together, especially if they're doing their own homebrew. So yeah, absolutely invaluable.
Yeah, I took two of his. Sorry, Danny, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say
two of his and meld them together. Sorry, there's our professional again. Yeah, we're just going to stop it. But yeah, I mean, I like two of those scenarios, and they ran right together, almost identical in the way that they could play out, and no one knowing the difference except me. I loved it. So
right.
Yep.
I was just going to say, I know that Rick Hershey too, like an artist who we all know and we've worked with before. He produces just sketches and sketches and sketches, and then releases like 100 character portraits at a time. So I think there's a way that these things can come together, right? Like he could release a coloring book of characters that someone else comes along, shades and draws, and then just put it out. So now you've got your 100 townsfolk. Oh, you need some nobility. Somebody just produces those. So it doesn't necessarily have to be produced with the product. It could be done like as an ancillary thing by a third party who's like, I'll flesh out your cast of characters, man. You do the first 40, I'll do the other 60.
Right. Well, I mean, Kobold Press has licensed out token sets, right? To people who put them up on the market. And that's great because it's a different art style, or somebody who already likes that person's look suddenly gets all the monsters from Tome of Beasts or Creature Codex done in that style. Especially the top-down style again.
For sure. Okay, so I know we're running low on time. What's that?
I said, yeah, a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've got some good, maybe good thoughts of my own that I'll share here. Some of my little like hacks for gaming and world building. So number one, I know that 99% of the game masters out there, if you're not a super experienced game master, or maybe even if you are, please resist the urge to take every single thing from every single book and throw it into your campaign setting. Such a thing is called the kitchen sink. I despise it because it dilutes what makes your campaign setting special. And I think don't feel the need to copy everything and make nothing stand out. Put just a few things in there that really, really matter, and give it and tie it to your world. Make some good story around it. Make it matter, right? Make it stand out. Dark Sun, we all love it, right? It's a great campaign setting. It's very, very different from Greyhawk, the Forgotten Realms. What's Paizo's campaign setting? Galarian. Okay, those are kitchen sink settings. As much as we love them, they're kitchen sink settings, right? So how many other campaign settings have insect people? Midgard does. That's really quite unique, right? So there's lots and lots of things that you can use, and especially if they matter to the story, please use them. But when you're just throwing everything under the sun in your campaign setting to make it seem cool because your players love those things, you're doing yourself and your story a disservice, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
What do you think, Wolfgang?
I agree with you in principle. In practice, it's really hard
Mm-hmm.
to avoid the kitchen sink over time, right?
Sure.
Like, I started Midgard as a fairly gritty, 4 or 5 main races: humans, kobolds, dwarves, snow elves, right? Elves have snuck in since then. Stuff tends to accrue to a campaign setting because, like, the players say, oh, I just want to play this one thing.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I want. And they give you big puppy dog eyes until they play whatever they want to play, right? And it's like
A Warforged.
Yeah, for instance, right? And so
here's my 13-page backstory explaining why he should be in your campaign.
Why he should be a special snowflake, and I don't want to play any of the 12 main races.
How I breathe.
Yes. I mean, but in practice, when you start small and have just, humans and insect folk, or humans and dragon kings, it makes a hell of an impression. People don't have to focus on all that other stuff.
Agreed. And I like to ask myself why something exists, or why it has that particular ability or alignment or special ability, right? Is it because you just copied it carte blanche and just dropped it into, your campaign setting? Can you tailor it and make it yours? Those are the key elements, I think, that can really tie the stuff that you love into your setting and make it your own.
Yeah, and as Wolfgang was talking about it earlier, but I think the hang your hat on what your campaign setting or what your world is, what makes it unique, and then you can spiderweb out from there and explain just about anything. I do tend to agree with you on the principle of no kitchen sink. But yeah, I mean, over time, it certainly is difficult to maintain that.
And the bigger your fan base, the more demands you'll get for every single niche, right? Like,
And that's why my stuff's so small. I don't.
We're lacking that vital feedback, Brian, of an audience.
Someday I'm going to write a campaign setting. It's going to have like 3-player races, and if you don't like it, tough. There's no way to get anyone else in. It's going to be baked into the cosmology that these are your choices. The Earth cooled, and there were these 3.
The end.
The end.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't like my campaign? Fine. Run your own. Maybe I can be a player.
And I'll explain to you why half Drow Hill Giant should be a player.
I think Brian's point about asking why is just an answer to the world building challenge of endless extrapolation, and sometimes needless balance. Like, I've got a dark race, I have to have a light race. I've got a god of war, I have to have a god of peace. I never let those symmetries bother me. We have a god of war. There's nothing you can do about it. You're kind of screwed. So be careful. That god of war is no one to mess with. And by kind of consciously breaking those symmetries up a little bit, I think that helps eliminate some kitchen sink mentality, because you don't feel the need for there to be a counter to everything that exists. Forgotten Realms is the perfect example of this. Just for every action, there's an equal opposite, other group, and it's a little overwhelming.
I can't wait for the day when I finally do get a campaign setting published, and Wolfgang comes back to me and he's like, Brian, weren't you the one that said don't do this, this, and this?
It'll be on YouTube, so
true.
Yeah,
it'll be on the internet. Must be true.
So I think we're at the point where we have to break. We're going to go in. I'm going to do a quick station ID here. We are Wizards of the Couch. I won't make that mistake again. We are twitch.tv/Wizards of the Couch. We are here tonight with Wolfgang Baur. We have been having a wide-ranging, very interesting, occasionally insulting conversation about world building and all the things that go into it. And I know a lot about building my own worlds, and I learned a lot. So when you can check us out on Spotify, when you can check us out on where else are we, Brian?
We are also on Google Play. Yeah,
Google Play, Spotify,
YouTube's
Apple Store. Are we on Apple?
We will be after this show.
Oh, great. And we're going to be broadcasting on YouTube later in the week, so you can check it all out again then. We have a real quick shout out, Matt. Tell us again real quickly about the Kickstarter that you launched today.
Kickstarter 4-part adventure series for the Era of Fear campaign setting, which is something that we at WizCo Games, which are the 4 gentlemen that you are looking at or have been watching this evening, are developing. It is episodic and intended for play over a convention, during a convention. So each episode is intended to be played over 4 hours convention block. Era of Fear itself is a 1920s Industrial Revolution era that has been forged through magic rather than technology.
Sweet, and I want to add a little sweetener on that. Gamehole Madison, Halloween through November 3rd, coming up here in 2019, Gamehole Con Madison. We are going to be running some of this content that we've already produced for the Era of Fear Kickstarter. So if you show up for that con, you get to play in some of those games. It could be very cool. So you should definitely check that out as well. If you're coming to Gamehole Con, follow us on social media. Wizards of the Couch, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snap, Hoop,
Jubilee Doob.
Scooby-Doo, Doobly-Doo.
Everywhere.
We're on all of them. We're on all the Twitters.
You can't escape us.
So now we're going to go real quick over to Matt. We got a question from the couch, and he'll take it from here.
Yeah, so every week we have we kind of scour the interwebs, the Twitters, and look for somebody who has a perplexing question on how to run their game. So this is going to shift gears a little bit from world building. The question this week is, how do you handle initiative in your game, and how do I speed up combat? Does rolling initiative every round make sense, or does it just bog things down? So we'll go over to Jimmy first, who's kind of in the virtual tabletop realm. How do you run an initiative, and how do you make it? If you think like everything's kind of bogging down, how do you speed things up?
You know the answer already to that question. So
You kill the player.
I kill
Got
the
it.
player. Sorry. So, but yeah. So initiative. I don't know if we get bogged down in it. I would like to run a scenario, one of the sessions where it changes every time, just to throw a wrench into the system and be different.
But you can do that with technology.
Yeah, well, it's there. But you get that pushback, because then that takes the players out of that little realm where they're used to, this is how it's going to run, and I know my turn's coming up. Well, but this is combat. This is a real life type of a scenario. And if we're doing theater of the mind, then in my games, why it's a reject, why the channel's that way is shit goes south real quick. And I love doing that and throwing, and I want the players, I'd like taking them out of that bubble. And so maybe I should just force it. It's a railroad, which, yes, that gives me, everybody knows when you play the rejects, Duff's going to railroad it some degree, and I'm not going to be bashful about it. It's true, because I'm different. I'm just different on that a little bit. I don't like complacency, and I don't like the typical, I know exactly what's coming up next. I want to run a wrench in the system. I want the monkey wrench. So yes.
We're gonna let Wolfgang go last on this one, so I'll make mine super fast. I built this because I'm a nerd who builds things. And how this works is everybody rolls initiative. You'll notice here Quellis, Barso, Hella, Glitch,
look at those names.
from Gen Con. And then what I do is I set this in front of me, and I either get my initiative monkey, who is one of my willing players who wants to earn inspiration, or I just run it and I say, okay, Quellis, you're first, you're on deck, and I point it right toward them like that. And then when they go, I flip it to this side. Then Barso goes, then I go, then Hella goes, then Glitch goes, and we flip it all the way down. When we're done, we're all on the opposite side, round 2, and we go right back through it. Everybody can see when they're going to go. And I usually tell people, if Quellis is going, I go, Barso, you're on deck. And then they know to roll their damage and all that kind of stuff. And I have the rule that if you roll ahead, your damage and your to hits, and don't hold up my game, there's an inspiration for somebody after the combat.
Ooh, that's...
So you run it
bribery
by the numbers. I'll reward somebody, and honestly, I never even have to assign it, because people will be like, "Dude, Jimmy crushed it. He gets the inspiration." There's usually a standout who earns that inspiration.
That's Brian. What do you think?
So, I used to roll initiative every round. And that was back when I had tons and tons of time in my teenage years to actually run combats that lasted for 4 hours or something. That's crazy by today's standards. So for the most part, I don't actually even roll initiative. And what I do is I just assign like a DC 10 plus initiative modifier to your average monsters, 15 plus modifiers for a influential character, maybe the mob boss or whatever. And then my players, I kind of go round robin, or I let them roll. But I like the round robin, especially with a group larger than 4. And I just reserve the right to interrupt them. So I might let 2 or 3 or so of them go, and then say, okay, boom, my monster takes its action. They're happy. Everyone can always know whose turn is next. It's nice and simple.
Nice.
Cool, Matt.
Not what I expected.
Right.
That's cool. That's cool, Brian. Not what I expected either.
Yeah. So actually everybody's pretty surprising, except for Jimmy, who I knew killed people.
Hashtag kill people.
I love to roll initiative every round, but to the point, or to the question, it bogs the hell out of bogs combat way down. So if you're looking to speed things up, I think what Brian described was fantastic. Yeah, and I never even thought about bribing the players. Like, hey, you get a point of inspiration before. That's also a very good tool. Yeah, it's ingenious. Wolfgang, what about you?
There was one campaign where I decided I was done rolling initiative, and I made everybody sit in dexterity order around the table. And so the rogue always went first, right? I mean, I was just going around the table, and I would slot my monsters into that group. The rogue loved it, right? And the wizard kind of hated it, but whatever. They got to end. They were kind of the cleanup batter anyway. It's like, here comes my fireball. You guys get out of my way.
Yep.
And it was predictable. I think the real advantage there wasn't just going around the couch. It was knowing, oh, my turn is always between, Joe and Mary.
Yep.
And I like initiative as an idea to way to add randomness and make people pay attention and when is my turn and am I ready? But the uncertainty it injects into combat does also slow things down, right? And the more often
maybe
it might be slightly counterproductive. I gave up that system after that campaign, but I kind of liked it. I might go back to it.
Well, on that, we are going to wrap up tonight's Wizards of the Couch episode. Wolfgang, we promised you the shameless plug, so now's the time.
Now's my chance.
Tell us what's going on in your world. To the extent that you can share what you're working on, awesome. What you might have coming out between now and Christmas, let us know.
All right. Well, sure. I'd be happy to tell you. As always, we've got the Warlock Patreon, which is where we do all those one-shots and layers. We do a zine, 28 pages. I mean, we're talking $1 a month gets you the PDF. And we're up to 40 adventures. So you're getting your money's worth from our Patreon from the Kobolds.
Yeah, without question.
Yeah, and the other thing we've got coming up, we've got a hardcover version of collecting. For those of you who have missed the Warlock Patreon, and you have missed it, we're doing a hardcover collection of the first 10 booklets, plus a whole bunch of new stuff, about 4 or 5 installments new, in print with binding for like $24. We'll be out in time for Christmas and called the Warlock Grimoire. I can also announce here something that hasn't been announced previously, but you know that Tome of Beasts? World exclusive. # world exclusive. The Tome of Beasts is coming out in a pocket edition, which means for 20 some bucks, $22, you have a version that is paperback sized or slightly larger, like 6x9, and it is so portable. It weighs so little. It's not a hardcover. It will never last the way a hardcover lasts. But if you're just tossing it into your backpack or carrying it down to your game room, you'll feel the difference. So for anybody who has just bought the PDF and always kind of wanted the print reference, the pocket edition of Tome of Beasts will be out for Christmas.
Wow. Well, you heard it here first from the Wolfgang that there's a pocket edition coming out of Tome of Beasts. That's crazy. And for people who lug stuff around conventions, that's no joke. It's nice to have a small book. Not enough people do this. So anyway, I just really want to, before we go, I'm getting like off screen, like, ooh, hand raising from Brian. You have one last question for Wolfgang?
Yeah, they tried to cast silence on me. It didn't work.
Nope.
All right, Wolfgang.
Yeah.
So during my day job, I do branding. And so I want to ask you a question.
Uh-oh.
What made you associate yourself with the Kobold? I think everyone should know the answer to this question.
Why did I associate myself with the Kobold? Oh, there are at least 3 good reasons. But the first one is, hey, the relentless survivors and underdogs, right? They're small but fierce. You can kill off a lot of kobolds, but it doesn't matter. We're going to keep coming back. The other reason is they're German monsters, and they come from German legends. And the last reason is the most nerdishly obscure. I was a chemist. I have a degree in chemistry. And the word cobalt and the word cobalt are linguistically the same damn thing, right? They were mining goblins. And so that bluish metal that we love now to put in steel and alloys is named after the little cobalt. So it's my little chemistry joke too. Yeah, that's the reason the Kobold Company logo is the color it is.
Is that
It's
right?
blue. It's
That's
cobalt
fantastic.
blue.
Excellent.
So there you go.
I was carefully watching Matt because he runs KoboldCon, and I was waiting to see if his like piercing gauge of judgment would deem your answers worthy, or if he was going to like be. So, what's the verdict, Matt? Are you satisfied with these answers?
I'm the one that is being judged, not vice versa. So yeah. Those
Hey,
are all
you're running-
fantastic. Those are all absolutely fantastic tidbits. I'll take back for KoboldCon in April.
And you know what else we need to take back to
Wolfgang.
KoboldCon?
Oh.
I have got to show up at KoboldCon. I have been hearing about this show.
Yep.
I have been wanting to go to this show. I think 2020 is the year I finally pull the trigger and say I'm bringing the Kobold Hordes. You'll need room for 600, please.
My favorite thing about kobolds is they change from little dog men into little dragon men, and no one knows why. So
We're good.
okay, so we are super happy once again. Thank you, Wolfgang, for being here.
Oh, thank you.
Wolfgang Baur,
Totally
publisher
pleasure.
at Kobold Press.
Thank you
He
so
has
much.
made many words that I like to read and then run for my players. And I cannot think of a better thing for one person to give another. That's great. So real quick, our Patreon is up. Please visit us on our Patreon, Wizards of the Couch. And, when you see us on Facebook, YouTube, any of these various outlets, please like, share, subscribe, whatever the appropriate thing is. I think you hit a bell on one of them, and there's a thing you click, and there's liking and loving and frowny faces. We don't need those. But please just get the word out about what we're doing here. We think it's important to talk to important people in the gaming industry about why they do and how they do what they do. And it doesn't get any better than sitting here with Wolfgang. So thanks a lot again.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. It's been awesome, Wolfgang.
Hey, thank you all. I had a great time.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
go, Wolfgang.
See you another
All right.
time.
We'll be back in 5 minutes, folks. Just give us a few seconds
right.
here. And
Take care,
we'll see you in
buddy.
a sec. Yep.
Good.